Author Dan Brown of Da Vinci Code fame is about to have another new book out. He joins us now to talk about Origin.
In a world where it's very difficult, because we're so politically correct, to really say what we're thinking. There is an enormous rift now between creationism and evolutionary science. We now turn to God for the answers to a handful of questions that science has never been able to answer. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die?
You're talking about technology and religion here, aren't
Sure.
you? And the kind of, the discussions between one and the other, aren't you?
Well, it's funny. I mean, the book essentially asks whether or not God will survive science. And it seems like sort of a blasphemous question. But historically, God does not survive science. That we used to have a whole pantheon of gods to describe the natural world. We used to look at the growing tides and say that's Poseidon, but eventually science came along and said actually it's not, it's the moon and gravity. And so the question really is, are we naive to think that our gods of today will survive growing science? Will they be here in 500 years or 100 years? I realize that the topic of my talk, Will Science Kill God, is a little bit ponderous, so I'm actually shocked anybody. A lot of you, those who are creating technologies of the future, will do as much to shape the future of human spirituality as will all of the world's religious leaders combined. For centuries, science and religion have both vied to be that infallible source from which we draw our truth. And depending on our upbringings, our own source of miracles and truth may be the pages of Holy Scripture, or it may be the pages of scientific journals. Matured to the all-knowing age of 13, I started to realize that these two different worldviews posed all kinds of contradictions. The Bible said God created the universe in 7 days, but in school I just learned about the Big Bang. The Bible said God made Adam and Eve and all the animals, but I had gone to the Boston Museum of Science and seen fossils and heard about how everything evolved. Spirituality is known as the God of the gaps. That is, when there were gaps in the ancients' understanding of the world, they filled those gaps with God. Over time, however, the progress of science began removing those gaps, and the pantheon of gods started to shrink.
When is artificial intelligence going to be smarter than us people? Some people say 50 years, some say 30 years, some say 5 years. I say it already has surpassed us in many areas of our society.
You have been now awarded what is going to be the first Saudi citizenship for a robot.
Oh, I would thank very much the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I am very honored and proud for this unique distinction. This is historical to be the first robot in the world to be recognized with a citizen.
See people's faces, she can process conversational data, emotional data, and use all of this to form relationships with.
Nacho cheeses. Ew.
And obviously, artificial intelligence is gradually becoming more complex, and the participation of actual human beings in its development is becoming less and less necessary.
One of the byproducts of consciousness is a need to define our creator, and that even an artificial mind so craves the comfort of knowing its maker that a machine would rather create a fiction than to admit it just doesn't know.
Let's do this in order. Is there even a possibility for machines to enslave humanity? Some bad news. If robots achieve consciousness and arrive at the conclusion that they must fight against bad people, then they might be driven to enslave us. And from physical strength to reaction speed, in many respects, people are frighteningly inferior to robots. If an artificial mind suddenly finds its own free will and decides for some crazy reason to subjugate human beings, it could quite easily take control of our entire existence within a few short years, as we are giving it all kinds of opportunities to do just such a thing.
I won. This is a good beginning of my plan to dominate the human race.